They laughed when Elena Martinez chose the broken-down shack in the middle of nowhere, calling her the fool teacher who threw her life away for a pile of desert sand and tumbleweeds. But when Marcus Kane rode up that dusty trail 3 years later, his weathered hands holding geological surveys that would change everything, those same people would learn that sometimes the greatest treasures lie beneath the places others are too blind to see. "You always said this land had secrets," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he looked into her eyes. "You were right about more than you knew." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The year was 1887, and Copper Ridge, Nevada, was the kind of town that existed purely because someone had to draw a line on a map somewhere. Nestled between jagged red rocks and endless stretches of sagebrush, it served as a waystation for travelers heading to more promising destinations. The railroad had bypassed it 5 years earlier, leaving behind only dust, disappointment, and a handful of stubborn souls too proud or too poor to leave. Elena Martinez had arrived on a Tuesday morning in late spring, stepping off the mail wagon with nothing but a worn leather satchel, a teaching certificate from Sacramento, and a determination that burned brighter than the desert sun. At 24, she possessed the kind of quiet beauty that revealed itself slowly, like sunrise over the mountains. Her dark hair, always pulled back in a practical bun, framed intelligent brown eyes that seemed to see potential where others saw only problems. The town council had hired her sight unseen, desperate for any teacher willing to work for the pittance they could afford. What they got was a woman who would transform their one-room schoolhouse from a place children endured into a sanctuary where they learned to dream. But Elena's greatest dream lay 3 miles outside town, where an abandoned homestead sat crumbling under the relentless Nevada sky. The original owner, a prospector named Samuel Dawson, had vanished 2 years earlier, leaving behind only a crude wooden shack, a dry well, and 40 acres of what everyone agreed was the most worthless land in 3 counties. Everyone except Elena. She had seen the property during her first week in Copper Ridge, riding out with Martha Grayson, the banker's wife, and the closest thing the town had to a welcoming committee. Poor old Sam. Martha had clucked, shaking her head at the sight of the weathered structure. Spent his last dime convinced there was silver in these hills. Died broke and alone, probably from drinking too much rot-gut whiskey and chasing fool dreams. But Elena had felt something different, standing there in the shadow of the distant mountains. Maybe it was the way the light fell across the desert floor, or how the silence seemed pregnant with possibility rather than empty of hope. Whatever it was, she knew she had to have that land. The process of acquiring it had been surprisingly simple. The county held the deed for back taxes, and $40 was all it took to transfer ownership. $40 that represented nearly 2 months of her teaching salary. But Elena had never been one to calculate dreams in terms of practicality. The announcement of her purchase had rippled through Copper Ridge like a stone thrown into still water. At first, there was shock. Then, disbelief. Finally, the laughter began. "That city girl's lost her mind," declared Pete Hawkins, the town's self-appointed expert on everything. $40 for 40 acres of nothing but rocks and rattlesnakes. Could have bought herself a nice dress and found a husband instead. The criticism only intensified when Elena began spending her weekends at the property, cleaning out the shack, patching the roof with scrapwood, and attempting to coax life from the stubborn desert soil. She would ride out every Saturday morning on the old mare she had purchased from the livery stable, returning Sunday evening with dirt under her fingernails and a satisfaction that glowed in her face despite the obvious exhaustion. "Teaching's supposed to be temporary for girls like her," observed Mrs. Catherine Winters, the minister's wife, during one of the ladies' auxiliary meetings. "She should be looking for a proper husband, not playing pioneer woman in that godforsaken wasteland." But Elena persisted, driven by a vision only she could see. She imagined the shack restored and expanded, the well functioning again, maybe even a small garden where vegetables could grow despite the harsh climate. It wasn't about the money or proving anyone wrong. It was about creating something beautiful in a place where beauty seemed impossible. Her students at the schoolhouse began to understand this drive better than the adults ever would. Children, Elena had learned, possessed an innate appreciation for impossible dreams. When she spoke about her weekend projects during Monday morning lessons, their eyes would light up with genuine interest. "Miss Martinez," asked Tommy Chen, the 8-year-old son of the town's only Chinese family, "why do people say mean things about your house?" Elena had paused in her lesson about arithmetic, considering how to answer honestly without crushing the boy's faith in adult wisdom. "Sometimes," she said finally, "people are afraid of things they don't understand. When someone chooses a different path, it can make others uncomfortable because it reminds them of their own dreams they might have given up." Little Sarah O'Malley, whose father ran the town's only saloon, raised her hand tentatively. "Do you get scared out there all by yourself?" "Sometimes," Elena admitted. "But being scared of something worthwhile is different from being scared of something meaningless. When you're working towards something you believe in, fear becomes just another obstacle to overcome." These conversations with her students provided Elena with some of her happiest moments, but they also served to further separate her from the adult community. Parents began to whisper that the new teacher was filling their children's heads with foolish notions about chasing impossible dreams. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The situation came to a head during the autumn of her first year, when Elena made the mistake of inviting several families to visit her property for a harvest celebration. She had managed to coax a small crop of winter squash and hardy greens from a patch of ground behind the shack, and she wanted to share her success with the community. Only 3 families showed up, and their reactions ranged from polite bewilderment to barely concealed mockery. "It's very nice, dear," said Martha Grayson, her voice carrying the tone one might use to compliment a child's mud pie. "You've certainly made the best of a difficult situation." Her husband, Banker Grayson, was less diplomatic. "Miss Martinez, I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but this land isn't suitable for farming. The soil composition is all wrong, and the water table is too deep. You'd be better off selling it back to the county and investing in something more practical." Elena had smiled and thanked them for their concern, but inside, her heart had hardened a little more against the town's narrow vision of what was possible. Winter brought new challenges and deeper isolation. The 3-mile ride to her property became treacherous when snow and ice made the desert trails dangerous. Elena found herself trapped in town for weeks at a time, able to visit her land only during brief, warm spells when the weather cleared. During these long winter evenings, she would sit in her small room above the schoolhouse, planning improvements for spring and dreaming of the day when her shack would become a real home. She had begun keeping a journal, recording not just her daily activities but her hopes and observations about the land itself. One entry from February read, "The way the snow settles in the ravines suggests underground water sources that haven't been properly explored. Samuel Dawson may have been closer to something valuable than anyone realized. There are rock formations near the eastern boundary that look different from the surrounding stone. Darker, with an almost metallic sheen when wet. Worth investigating when the weather improves." Elena's isolation during that first winter was broken only by, observed Mrs. Catherine Winters, the minister's wife, during one of the ladies' auxiliary meetings. She should be looking for a proper husband, not playing pioneer woman in that God-forsaken wasteland. But Elena persisted, driven by a vision only she could see. She imagined the shack restored and expanded, the well functioning again, maybe even a small garden where vegetables could grow despite the harsh climate. It wasn't about the money or proving anyone wrong. It was about creating something beautiful in a place where beauty seemed impossible. Her students at the schoolhouse began to understand this drive better than the adults ever would. Children, Elena had learned, possessed an innate appreciation for impossible dreams. When she spoke about her weekend projects during Monday morning lessons, their eyes would light up with genuine interest. "Miss Martinez," asked Tommy Chen, the 8-year-old son of the town's only Chinese family, "why do people say mean things about your house?" Elena had paused in her lesson about arithmetic, considering how to answer honestly without crushing the boy's faith in adult wisdom. "Sometimes," she said finally, "people are afraid of things they don't understand. When someone chooses a different path, it can make others uncomfortable because it reminds them of their own dreams they might have given up." Little Sarah O'Malley, whose father ran the town's only saloon, raised her hand tentatively. Do you get scared out there all by yourself? Sometimes, Elena admitted, but being scared of something worthwhile is different from being scared of something meaningless. When you're working towards something you believe in, fear becomes just another obstacle to overcome. These conversations with her students provided Elena with some of her happiest moments, but they also served to further separate her from the adult community. Parents began to whisper that the new teacher was filling their children's heads with foolish notions about chasing impossible dreams. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The situation came to a head during the autumn of her first year, when Elena made the mistake of inviting several families to visit her property for a harvest celebration. She had managed to coax a small crop of winter squash and hardy greens from a patch of ground behind the shack, and she wanted to share her success with the community. Only 3 families showed up, and their reactions ranged from polite bewilderment to barely concealed mockery. "It's very nice, dear," said Martha Grayson, her voice carrying the tone one might use to compliment a child's mud pie. "You've certainly made the best of a difficult situation." Her husband, Banker Grayson, was less diplomatic. "Miss Martinez, I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but this land isn't suitable for farming. The soil composition is all wrong, and the water table is too deep. You'd be better off selling it back to the county and investing in something more practical." Elena had smiled and thanked them for their concern, but inside her heart had hardened a little more against the town's narrow vision of what was possible. Winter brought new challenges and deeper isolation. The 3-mile ride to her property became treacherous when snow and ice made the desert trails dangerous. Elena found herself trapped in town for weeks at a time, able to visit her land only during brief warm spells when the weather cleared. During these long winter evenings, she would sit in her small room above the schoolhouse, planning improvements for spring, and dreaming of the day when her shack would become a real home. She had begun keeping a journal, recording not just her daily activities but her hopes and observations about the land itself. One entry from February read, "The way the snow settles in the ravines suggests underground water sources that haven't been properly explored. Samuel Dawson may have been closer to something valuable than anyone realized. There are rock formations near the eastern boundary that look different from the surrounding stone, darker, with an almost metallic sheen when wet, worth investigating when the weather improves." Elena's isolation during that first winter was broken only by her interactions with her students and their families. Despite the adults' skepticism about her land purchase, most parents remained satisfied with her teaching abilities. The children were learning, their reading and arithmetic skills improving markedly under her patient instruction. It was during a parent conference in March that Elena first heard Marcus Kane's name mentioned. "There's a fellow been asking around town about mineral rights," said Jim O'Malley, Sarah's father. "Calls himself a geological surveyor, name of Kane. Been through here twice in the past month, buying drinks and asking questions about the old mining claims." Elena's pulse quickened, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. "What kind of questions?" "Wanted to know about Sam Dawson's place, among others. Asked if anyone had done any recent prospecting in the area." Jim shrugged. "Most folks told him he was wasting his time. This whole region was picked clean years ago." That night, Elena lay awake thinking about the mysterious surveyor. Part of her felt a flutter of vindication that a professional might be interested in the same area that had drawn her so strongly. But a larger part worried about what outside interest might mean for her quiet dreams. She didn't have to wait long to find out. Marcus Kane rode into Copper Ridge on a Thursday morning in early April, leading a pack horse loaded with equipment and supplies. Elena first saw him from the schoolhouse window as she prepared for the day's lessons. Even from a distance, there was something about the man that commanded attention. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in wild places. His broad shoulders and weathered face. Speaking of years spent under open skies, Elena tried to focus on her teaching throughout the morning, but her attention kept drifting to the window, wondering if she might catch another glimpse of the stranger. During the lunch break, she stepped outside ostensibly to supervise the children's play, but really to see if Kane was still in town. She found him at the general store, examining a hand-drawn map with store owner Ben Morrison. Up close, Marcus Kane was even more impressive than his silhouette had suggested. Tall and lean, With sun-streaked brown hair and intelligent green eyes, he possessed the kind of rugged handsomeness that came from hard work rather than good breeding. Elena guessed him to be in his early 30s, old enough to have acquired expertise but young enough to still pursue challenges. "Miss Martinez," called Ben Morrison, noticing her approach. "Come meet Mr. Kane here. He's a geological surveyor, been asking about the local terrain." Marcus turned, and when his eyes met Elena's, she felt an unexpected jolt of connection. There was intelligence there, and kindness, but also something else. A recognition, as if he had been looking for something specific and might have just found it. "Miss Martinez," he said, touching the brim of his hat respectfully. "I understand you're the local school teacher." "That's right," Elena replied, proud that her voice remained steady despite the way her heart had begun racing. "And you're interested in our local geology?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Among other things. I've heard you own some property out toward the eastern hills." "The old Dawson place?" Elena felt a chill of apprehension mixed with curiosity. "I do. May I ask why you're interested?" "Professional curiosity, mostly. I've been studying mineral deposits throughout this region, and there are some geological formations that suggest this area might have been underexplored." He paused, studying her face carefully. "Would you mind if I took a look at your land sometime? I can assure you I'm not interested in making any claims or causing trouble. Just want to satisfy my scientific curiosity." Elena found herself nodding before she had fully processed the implications. "Of course. I'm usually out there on weekends, working on improvements. This Saturday, perhaps?" "Saturday would be fine." As Marcus Kane rode away from the general store, Elena stood watching until he disappeared around the bend in the road. Something had just changed in her carefully ordered world, though she couldn't yet identify exactly what. That evening, Martha Grayson appeared at Elena's door with a pot of tea and barely contained excitement. "My dear, you must tell me everything about your conversation with that surveyor," Martha insisted, settling herself in Elena's small parlor like a cat preparing for a long nap. "Jim Morrison says he asked specifically about your property." Elena poured tea and chose her words carefully. "He seems to be conducting a general survey of the area. Nothing more specific than that." Martha's eyes gleamed with the particular intensity of someone who lived for gossip. "Well, I certainly hope you're not planning to sell to some stranger without consulting people who have your best interests at heart." $40 was one thing. But if there's actually value in that land, you shouldn't let yourself be taken advantage of. "I have no intention of selling," Elena said firmly. "Mr. Kane made no mention of purchasing anything. He simply wants to examine the geological formations." Martha sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Well, you just be careful, dear. Strange men asking questions about land usually means someone knows something the rest of us don't." After Martha left, Elena found herself unable to concentrate on her usual evening activities. She attempted to grade papers, plan lessons for the following day, and write in her journal, but her thoughts kept returning to Marcus Kane and his interest in her property. Friday seemed to drag on forever. Elena's students, sensing her distraction, became restless and unfocused. Finally, young Tommy Chen raised his hand during a reading lesson. "Miss Martinez, are you feeling sick? You keep looking out the window." Elena forced herself to refocus on her responsibilities. "I'm fine, Tommy. Just thinking about this weekend's projects. Now, who can tell me what this word means?" That evening, Elena spent extra time preparing for Saturday's visit. She chose her most practical dress, one that would be suitable for walking over rough terrain while still maintaining appropriate modesty. She packed a lunch basket with enough food for 2 people, telling herself it was simply good manners to offer refreshment to a guest. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for outdoor exploration. Elena arrived at her property earlier than usual, wanting to ensure everything was as presentable as possible. She swept out the shack, arranged some wildflowers in a jar on the rough wooden table, and checked that the pump she had installed on the old well was working properly. Marcus Kane arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, riding the same sturdy horse she had seen in town. Behind him, his pack horse carried what appeared to be surveying equipment and sample containers. "Good morning, Miss Martinez," he called out as he dismounted. Beautiful day for fieldwork. "Good morning, Mr. Kane. Please call me Elena. We're rather informal out here in the middle of nowhere." "Marcus," he replied with a warm smile. "And I have to say, this doesn't look like the middle of nowhere to me. This looks like possibility." The comment surprised Elena. After months of criticism and mockery from the townspeople, here was someone who seemed to understand what she saw in this place. "Would you like to see the property boundaries first, or examine the structures?" she asked. "Let's start with the lay of the land, if you don't mind. I'd like to get a sense of the overall geological situation before focusing on specific areas." They spent the next hour walking the boundaries of Elena's 40 acres, Marcus stopping frequently to examine rock formations, test soil composition, and make notes in a leather-bound journal. Elena found herself fascinated by his systematic approach and the obvious expertise behind his observations. "The mineral content in this soil is unusually high," he commented as they paused near the eastern edge of the property. "And these rock formations suggest significant geological activity in the past." "What kind of activity?" Elena asked. Marcus straightened from where he had been kneeling to examine an outcropping of dark stone. "The kind that sometimes brings valuable materials up from deep underground and deposits them in accessible locations." Elena's heart began to race, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Are you saying there might be minerals on this land?" "I'm saying it's possible. These formations are consistent with areas where silver and other metals are sometimes found." He looked at her seriously. "Have you done any digging or excavation since you've owned the property?" "Some. I've been trying to expand the well, and I dug a small root cellar behind the shack. I found some interesting rocks, but I assumed they were just common desert stones." Marcus's expression sharpened with interest. "Would you mind showing me what you found?" Elena led him to the shack, where she had stored several unusual stones she had discovered during her excavation work. Marcus examined each piece carefully, occasionally using a small magnifying glass from his equipment pack. "Elena," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "where exactly did you find these?" She showed him the locations, watching as his excitement became increasingly difficult to contain. At the sight of her partially dug root cellar, Marcus knelt and began scraping away loose dirt with his hands. "Would you mind if I did some test digging here? Nothing extensive, just enough to get a better sense of what's below the surface." Of course. What happened next would change Elena's life forever. Using proper excavation tools, Marcus began carefully removing layers of earth from the cellar site. 3 feet down, his shovel struck something that rang with a distinctly metallic sound. "Elena," he said quietly, "I think you need to see this." In the bottom of the small excavation, a vein of dark ore ran through the rock like a silver ribbon. Even to Elena's untrained eye, it was clearly something unusual and potentially valuable. Marcus carefully extracted several samples, his hands trembling slightly with excitement. "I'll need to have these assayed to be certain, but Elena, I think you may be sitting on one of the richest silver deposits I've ever seen." The words seemed to echo in the desert silence. Elena stared at the exposed vein, hardly able to process what she was seeing. "Are you certain?" she whispered. "Not completely, not without proper testing, but if I'm right about what I'm seeing here, this single vein could be worth more money than most people see in a lifetime." Elena sank down onto a nearby rock, overwhelmed by the implications. All those months of criticism and mockery, all those voices telling her she had wasted her money on worthless desert land. And now this. "How much money?" she asked, hardly daring to voice the question. Marcus looked at the samples in his hands, then back at the exposed vein. "If this ore proves to be as rich as it appears, and if the vein continues at this quality for any significant distance, we could be looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars. Maybe more." The number was so large that Elena couldn't quite grasp it. She had been living on $30 a month, carefully budgeting every penny. The idea of hundreds of thousands of dollars seemed like fantasy. "What happens now?" she asked. "First, we get these samples properly tested." I know an assayer in Carson City who can give us accurate results within a week. Second, we need to do more extensive exploration to determine the size and extent of the deposit. Marcus sat down beside her, his expression serious. And third, we need to be very careful about who we tell and how we proceed. News like this has a way of attracting attention, not all of it welcome. Elena stared at the silver-streaked rock in Marcus's weathered hands, her mind reeling between disbelief and vindication. The desert wind whispered through the sagebrush around them, carrying the scent of possibility on its wings. She had dreamed of proving the doubters wrong, but this exceeded every fantasy she had dared to entertain. "We should keep this between us for now," Marcus said, carefully wrapping the ore samples in cloth and placing them in his saddlebags. "Mining claims can get complicated quickly, especially when word spreads about a significant find." Elena nodded, though part of her wanted to ride straight back to Copper Ridge and show the samples to every person who had called her foolish. The banker who said she was throwing money away, the minister's wife who declared she was playing at being a pioneer, Pete Hawkins, who insisted she should have bought a dress instead. "How long before we know for certain?" she asked. "I'll ride to Carson City tomorrow. The assayer there is reliable and discreet. If I push hard, I can be back by Wednesday with results." Marcus stood and brushed dirt from his knees, his green eyes serious. "Elena, I want you to understand something. If this proves to be what I think it is, your life is about to change dramatically. Are you prepared for that?" The question hung in the air between them, like smoke from a distant fire. Elena looked around at her humble property, the patched shack that had become her sanctuary, the struggling garden that represented months of back-breaking work. Change had never frightened her, but the magnitude of what Marcus was suggesting felt overwhelming. "I suppose we'll find out," she said finally. "Change has been the only constant in my life anyway." Marcus smiled at that, and Elena felt something warm unfurl in her chest. There was understanding in his expression, a recognition of the kind of courage it took to chase dreams in the face of universal skepticism. "There's something else we should discuss," he said, his tone becoming more businesslike. "If these samples prove valuable, you'll need help developing the claim properly. Mining isn't something you can do alone, especially not a woman in this territory." Elena felt a flash of irritation at the assumption of her helplessness, but before she could respond, Marcus continued. "I'm not suggesting you're incapable. But mining operations require significant capital, specialized equipment, and knowledge of extraction techniques. Plus, there are legal considerations, claim registrations, and protection issues to consider. What are you proposing?" "A partnership. I provide the technical expertise, equipment, and initial capital for development. You provide the land, and we split the profits." Marcus paused, studying her face. 60-40 in your favor, since it's your property." Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering the offer. She had spent so many months working alone, defending her choices against constant criticism, that the idea of having a knowledgeable partner felt both appealing and frightening. "Let's see what the assayer says first," she decided. "Then we can discuss terms." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Smart approach. Never make important decisions based on speculation." They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring other areas of Elena's property, Marcus making detailed notes and sketches while Elena watched and learned. She found herself fascinated by his methodical approach and the way he read geological signs like other people read newspapers. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, Marcus prepared to head back to town. "I'll stay at the hotel tonight and leave for Carson City at first light," he said, securing his equipment to the packhorse. "Thank you," Elena said simply, "for everything, for taking my land seriously when no one else would." "Elena," Marcus said, turning to face her directly, "I've been doing geological surveys for 12 years. I've seen a lot of people chase foolish dreams based on wishful thinking, but I've also learned to recognize when someone has genuine instincts about the land." He swung up into his saddle. "Your instincts were right. Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise." After he rode away, Elena remained at the property until full darkness forced her to return to town. She rode slowly, savoring the solitude and trying to process everything that had happened. By the time she reached Copper Ridge, Most of the businesses were closed, and the streets were empty. She stabled her horse and climbed the stairs to her room above the schoolhouse, her mind still spinning with possibilities. Sleep proved elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that silver vein gleaming in the excavation pit, heard Marcus's voice saying words like hundreds of thousands of dollars and richest deposit I've ever seen. Sunday passed in a blur of restless energy. Elena attended church services, where she found herself studying the faces of people who had dismissed her dreams. Mrs. Winters, who declared teaching should be temporary for girls like her. Banker Grayson, who insisted her land was worthless. Pete Hawkins, holding forth about her foolishness to anyone who would listen. "You're quiet today, dear," Martha Grayson commented after the service. "Everything all right?" "Just thinking about school lessons for this week," Elena replied, surprised by how easily the lie came. "And how did your meeting with that surveyor go yesterday? Did he find anything interesting on your property?" Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice steady. "He seemed to think the geological formations were worth studying further." "Well, I certainly hope he doesn't fill your head with any more foolish notions about that land being valuable," Martha said with a patronizing smile. "Some of these traveling men will say anything to take advantage of a young woman living alone." Elena excused herself and walked home, Martha's words echoing in her mind. In a few days, she might have proof that her supposedly foolish notions were actually founded on solid silver. The irony was almost too delicious to bear. Monday brought the familiar routine of teaching, but Elena found concentration difficult. Her students seemed to sense her distraction, becoming restless and unfocused. During the lunch break, young Sarah O'Malley approached her desk. "Miss Martinez, you seem different today. Are you sad about something?" Elena looked into the girl's concerned face and felt a pang of affection. Her students had always been more perceptive than the adults in town. "Not sad, Sarah. Just thinking about some important decisions I might need to make soon." "Good decisions or scary decisions?" "Both, I think." Sarah nodded solemnly. "My papa says the best decisions are usually both." The wisdom of children never ceased to amaze Elena. She squeezed Sarah's hand gently. "Your papa is a smart man." Tuesday crawled by even more slowly. Elena caught herself staring out the schoolhouse window, watching the road that led to Carson City, and wondering when Marcus might return. She had told herself not to expect him before Wednesday, but hope and anxiety made time stretch, like taffy. Wednesday morning arrived gray and overcast, with clouds building over the mountains that promised afternoon thunderstorms. Elena tried to focus on her lessons, but every sound from the street made her pulse quicken. When the lunch bell rang, she stepped outside to scan the horizon. There, riding down Main Street at a steady pace, was Marcus Kane. Even from a distance, something in his posture suggested news of significance. Elena forced herself to remain calm, to finish supervising the children's lunch period before allowing herself to walk toward the general store where Marcus had dismounted. He saw her approaching, and his face broke into a grin that made her heart leap. Without a word, he reached into his saddlebags and withdrew a folded paper, handing it to her with ceremony. Elena unfolded the assayer's report with trembling fingers. The technical language was mostly incomprehensible to her, but certain phrases leaped off the page. Exceptionally high silver content. Premium grade ore. Estimated value per ton. "Marcus," she whispered, looking up from the paper. "Is this saying what I think it's saying?" "Elena," he said quietly, "your $40 investment just became worth more than the entire annual budget of this town. Maybe more than the budgets of 5 towns this size." The assayer's report confirmed their wildest hopes. The ore samples contained some of the richest silver concentrations ever documented in Nevada territory. If the vein continued at this quality for any significant distance, Elena's property could yield millions of dollars in precious metal. "There's more," Marcus continued, pulling out additional papers. "I took the liberty of researching the surrounding claims. Most of the adjacent properties have been abandoned or never properly filed. If we act quickly, we could potentially expand your holdings significantly." Elena stared at the documents, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. "This feels like a dream," she murmured. "It's not a dream. It's the result of having courage when everyone else saw only problems," Marcus said. "But Elena, we need to move carefully now. News like this travels fast, and there are people who would do anything to get their hands on a claim this valuable." As if summoned by his words, Banker Grayson appeared at Elena's elbow, his eyes fixed on the papers in her hands. "Miss Martinez," he said with forced joviality, "I couldn't help but notice Mr. Kane has returned from his travels. I trust his survey of your property was educational?" Elena folded the assayer's report carefully and slipped it into her pocket. "Very educational, Mr. Grayson. Thank you for asking." The banker's smile became strained around the edges. "Well, if there's anything of interest out there, I hope you'll remember that the bank is always available to help with investment opportunities. We wouldn't want you to make any hasty decisions without proper financial advice." "I'll keep that in mind," Elena replied evenly. After Grayson moved away, Marcus lowered his voice. "That's exactly what I was worried about. People are going to start paying very close attention to your affairs now." "Let them," Elena said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "For months they've told me I was foolish for believing in this land. Now they want to be helpful. Where was all this concern when I was working alone out there?" Marcus studied her face, noting the transformation from uncertain teacher to determined landowner. "What do you want to do?" Elena looked around at the town that had mocked her dreams, at the people who had dismissed her vision as the fantasy of a naive city girl. She thought about the children in her classroom who had listened to her talk about courage and persistence. She thought about the silver vein waiting beneath the desert floor, proof that sometimes faith was rewarded beyond imagination. "I want to file the necessary claims immediately," she said. "I want to secure my rights to this land before anyone else gets ideas about its value. And then I want to develop it properly, the right way." "That means accepting my partnership offer?" Elena met his eyes directly. "Yes, but with modifications. Equal partnership. 50-50. This is too important for either of us to do alone." Marcus extended his hand. "Partners?" Elena shook it firmly. "Partners." That evening, as storm clouds gathered over Copper Ridge and the first drops of rain began to fall, Elena sat in her room writing letters, one to the Territorial Mining Office, filing formal claims on her property and adjacent abandoned lands, another to a lawyer in Carson City, requesting assistance with the legal aspects of mining operations, a third to her sister in Sacramento, though she couldn't bring herself to explain the full situation yet. As she wrote, Elena could hear voices from the saloon below carrying on the night air. Word was already spreading that the surveyor had found something interesting on the schoolteacher's worthless land. She caught fragments of conversation through her window. "Heard there might be some value out there after all. Always said that girl had more sense than we gave her credit for. Wonder if she'd be interested in selling now that she knows what she's got." Elena smiled grimly and continued writing. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. Tomorrow, she and Marcus would begin the process of transforming her $40 gamble into something that would change not just her life, but possibly the entire future of Copper Ridge. The rain intensified, drumming against her window like applause. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the desert, echoing off the mountains that held their secrets so close. But Elena was no longer afraid of storms or secrets or the long road ahead. She had found silver beneath the sand, and more importantly, she had found the courage to claim it. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the air clean and left the desert sparkling with moisture. Elena arrived at the schoolhouse early, but her mind was already racing ahead to the afternoon when she and Marcus planned to return to the property and begin more extensive exploration. During morning lessons, she found herself looking at her students with new eyes. These children who had believed in her dreams when their parents dismissed them deserved to see what persistence and courage could accomplish. She made a mental note to bring them out to the property someday soon, to show them that their teacher's weekend projects had led to something extraordinary. "Miss Martinez," asked Tommy Chen during arithmetic class, "you seem different today. Happy different." Elena smiled at the perceptive boy. "Sometimes good things happen when we don't expect them, Tommy. It reminds us that hard work and patience can pay off in ways we never imagined. Like when I practice my reading every day and now I can read the whole newspaper. Exactly like that. But sometimes the rewards are even bigger than we dared to hope. At lunchtime, Marcus appeared at the schoolhouse door, carrying official-looking documents and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. Elena dismissed her students for their break and invited him inside. "The claims are filed," he announced, spreading papers across her desk. "Your original 40 acres, plus 3 adjacent parcels that had been abandoned. Total of 160 acres, all legally yours as of this morning." Elena stared at the claim certificates, each one stamped and signed by territorial officials. Her name appeared on each document as the primary holder, with Marcus listed as development partner. "It's really happening," she said softly. "It's really happening. And Elena, there's more good news. I sent word to some associates in San Francisco about equipment and financing. Based on the assayer's report, there are investors willing to provide whatever capital we need for proper mining operations." Investors? People with money who want to fund mining ventures in exchange for a percentage of the profits. With ore this rich, we could have our choice of backers. Marcus paused, studying her expression. "But only if that's what you want. We could also develop it more slowly, using just our own resources." Elena considered the options. Quick development with outside money would mean faster returns but less control. Slower development would preserve their independence but delay the rewards. What do you recommend? Honestly, I think we should start with a middle approach. Use some investor capital to do proper exploration and determine the full extent of the deposit. Once we know exactly what we're dealing with, we can make informed decisions about larger development. It was a sensible plan, and Elena found herself trusting Marcus's judgment completely. There was something about his straightforward manner and obvious expertise that made partnership feel natural rather than risky. "All right," she decided. "Let's proceed carefully but decisively." That afternoon, they rode out to the property together, this time bringing proper mining equipment borrowed from the assayer in Carson City. Elena watched with fascination as Marcus set up a more systematic exploration of the area around the original silver vein. The results exceeded even their optimistic expectations. Test holes dug at intervals across the property revealed that the silver deposit wasn't just a single vein, but part of a much larger underground formation. The ore quality remained consistently high, and the quantity appeared to be substantial. "Elena," Marcus said as they stood looking at core samples laid out on a tarp, "I think we're looking at one of the most significant silver discoveries in Nevada Territory history." The words should have filled her with joy, but instead Elena felt a strange mixture of elation and trepidation. Success of this magnitude would bring attention, and attention would bring complications. She thought about banker Grayson's sudden interest in her financial decisions, about the whispered conversations in the saloon, about the way people's attitudes had already begun to shift. "Are you having second thoughts?" Marcus asked, noticing her expression. "Not about the mining. About everything else. This morning, Martha Grayson stopped by the schoolhouse to invite me to tea. Martha Grayson, who hasn't spoken to me socially since I bought this land. Suddenly, everyone wants to be my friend." Marcus nodded, understanding. "Wealth changes how people see you, usually before you've even gotten used to having it yourself. The question is, are you prepared to handle that?" Elena looked around at her property, at the land that had called to her from the first moment she saw it. She thought about the months of solitary work, the criticism and mockery, the quiet satisfaction of believing in something when no one else would. "I've handled everything else that's come my way," she said finally. "I suppose I'll handle this too." That evening in town, the speculation about Elena's property had intensified. The hotel bar was full of men who claimed to have always known there was value in those hills, who remembered encouraging the young teacher in her land purchase, who had investment opportunities they were eager to discuss. Elena avoided the hotel entirely, choosing instead to have dinner in her room and spend the evening planning. She made lists of everything that would need to be accomplished in the coming weeks: legal documentation, equipment procurement, workforce hiring, and security considerations. The last item troubled her most. Marcus had mentioned the need for protection, and she was beginning to understand why. News of a major silver strike would draw prospectors, claim jumpers, and various unsavory characters who saw opportunity in other people's good fortune. A knock at her door interrupted her planning. Elena opened it to find Dr. Harrison, the town's elderly physician, holding his medical bag and wearing a concerned expression. "Miss Martinez, I hope you'll forgive the late hour, but I wanted to speak with you privately about a matter of some importance." Elena invited him in, curious about what could bring the reserved doctor to her door after dark. "I've been hearing talk around town about your land," he began, settling into the room's single chair. "About potential mineral wealth. I wanted to offer some advice, if you'll accept it from an old man who's seen boomtowns come and go." "Of course, Dr. Harrison. I'd welcome your perspective." "Money changes people, Miss Martinez, not just how others see you, but how you see yourself. I've watched good people lose their way when fortune smiled on them suddenly." He leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped around his medical bag. "The key is remembering who you were before the money and staying true to that person." Elena felt a rush of gratitude for his genuine concern. "Thank you, doctor. That's wise advice. There's something else. In boom situations, communities can become divided between those who benefit and those who don't. As someone who will likely employ many local people, you'll have the power to either unite this town or split it apart." His eyes were kind but serious. "Choose wisely." After he left, Elena sat thinking about his words. She had been so focused on the practical aspects of developing the mine that she hadn't fully considered her responsibility to the community. Her success could indeed transform Copper Ridge, but the nature of that transformation would depend largely on the choices she made. She opened her journal and began writing, not about mining operations or business plans, but about the kind of legacy she wanted to create, the kind of employer she wanted to be, the kind of change she wanted to bring to a town that had been slowly dying before silver breathed new life into its future. Outside her window, the desert night was calm and clear, stars brilliant in the dry air. Somewhere out there, beneath the moonlit hills, lay treasure beyond imagination. But sitting in her simple room above the schoolhouse, Elena realized that the greatest treasure might be the opportunity to prove that dreams, pursued with courage and integrity, could benefit not just the dreamer, but an entire community. The real work was just beginning. The first crews arrived on a crisp October morning, their wagons loaded with equipment that transformed Elena's quiet property into a bustling operation. She stood watching from the porch of her newly expanded cabin, marveling at how quickly everything had changed. What had once been a solitary weekend retreat was now the center of the most ambitious mining venture in the territory. Marcus supervised the workers with the easy authority of someone who had managed complex operations before. Elena observed how he treated each man with respect, learning names and listening to suggestions. It was a management style she made mental notes to emulate when dealing with the dozen teachers she planned to hire for the expanded school system. "Miss Martinez," called out Bill Hawthorne, the lead engineer Marcus had hired from Colorado. "We're ready to begin the primary shaft excavation. Would you like to see the plans one more time before we start?" Elena joined him at the makeshift table, where architectural drawings were spread beneath the morning sun. The proposed mine would be a model of efficiency and safety, with proper ventilation systems and structural supports that would protect workers while maximizing ore extraction. "The initial investment is substantial," Hawthorne continued, "but with ore this rich, you should see returns within 6 months of full operation." 6 months. Elena tried to imagine what her life would look like then, when the silver flowing from these hills would make her one of the wealthiest women in the American West. The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. "Miss Elena," interrupted young Jenny Morrison, Ben Morrison's daughter who had become Elena's unofficial assistant. "There's a gentleman here to see you. Says he's from San Francisco." The gentleman turned out to be Harrison Clark, an impeccably dressed investor who had traveled from California specifically to discuss Elena's mining operation. He stood beside an expensive carriage, clearly impressed by the organized efficiency of the work site. "Miss Martinez," he said, removing his hat with a flourish. "I represent a consortium of investors who are very interested in your remarkable discovery. We'd like to discuss a substantial partnership arrangement. Elena invited him to join her and Marcus in the cabin for coffee and business discussions. Clark's proposal was impressive in scope. His investors were prepared to provide unlimited capital in exchange for a controlling interest in the mining operation. "You would retain ownership of the land, of course," Clark explained, spreading financial projections across Elena's kitchen table. "But our expertise and resources could develop this mine into the largest silver producer west of the Mississippi. The profits would be enormous." Marcus studied the numbers carefully, while Elena considered the implications. Financial security beyond imagination was being offered on a silver platter, but it would come at the cost of control over her own discovery. "Mr. Clark," Elena said finally, "your offer is generous, but I'm not interested in giving up control of this operation. Marcus and I have developed a sustainable plan that will benefit both our investors and the local community." Clark's smile became condescending. "Miss Martinez, with respect, mining is a complex business. Perhaps you don't fully understand the challenges involved in managing an operation of this magnitude." Elena felt familiar heat rise in her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. "I understand that this is my land, my discovery, and my decision. I appreciate your interest, but we're not looking for a controlling partner." After Clark left, clearly disappointed, Marcus turned to Elena with an expression of admiration. "You just turned down what might have been the largest mining deal in Nevada history." "I turned down the chance to become an employee on my own property," Elena corrected. "There's a difference." Over the following weeks, Elena threw herself into learning every aspect of mining operations. She studied engineering reports, memorized geological surveys, and spent hours observing the actual excavation process. The workers, initially surprised by her hands-on involvement, began to appreciate having an owner who understood their challenges. The first significant silver extraction occurred on a Thursday morning in early November. Elena stood with Marcus and the crew as they brought up the initial cart of ore from the newly completed shaft. The rocks gleamed with metallic veins that promised wealth beyond calculation. "Congratulations, Miss Martinez," said Hawthorne, grinning broadly. "You're officially in the silver business." That evening, Elena invited the entire work crew to a celebration dinner at the hotel. She wanted to acknowledge their hard work and establish a tradition of sharing success with the people who made it possible. The gesture was unprecedented in local mining culture, and word of it spread throughout Copper Ridge within hours. "She bought dinner for every single worker," Martha Grayson reported to her husband, "treated them like honored guests instead of hired help. Most unusual behavior for someone in her position." But Elena's unusual behavior was precisely what made her operation different. While other mine owners maintained strict social separation from their workers, she made a point of knowing each man's name, family situation, and professional goals. When Tom Bradley mentioned his dream of starting his own small mining claim, Elena helped him research available land. When Carlos Mendez struggled with English, she arranged for evening lessons at the schoolhouse. The silver began flowing in quantities that exceeded even Marcus's optimistic projections. Each week brought new extraction records, and the assayers' reports confirmed that ore quality remained consistently exceptional. Elena found herself depositing more money each month than she had previously earned in an entire year. But wealth brought unexpected complications. Letters arrived daily from inventors, investment advisors, and marriage-minded gentlemen who had heard about the silver teacher of Copper Ridge. Elena hired Jenny Morrison full-time to help manage correspondence and screen visitors. More troubling were the changes in town dynamics. As Elena's operation employed more local men at wages significantly higher than previous opportunities, economic disparities became pronounced. The hotel upgraded its facilities to accommodate visiting businessmen. New shops opened to serve the growing population, but longtime residents who weren't directly benefiting from the mining boom began to feel left behind. The situation came to a head during the December town council meeting, which Elena attended to discuss infrastructure improvements needed to support the growing community. "Easy enough to talk about improvements when you're the one getting rich," grumbled Pete Hawkins, his resentment poorly concealed. "Some of us been here 20 years without striking it lucky." Elena stood to address the room, aware that every eye was upon her. "Mr. Hawkins, you're absolutely right that I've been fortunate. But luck had nothing to do with buying land everyone said was worthless and working it when people called me foolish. She looked around the crowded room, recognizing faces that had dismissed her dreams just months earlier. The mine is providing jobs for 37 local men. We're purchasing supplies from every business in town. And I'm proposing to fund a new school building, a medical clinic expansion, and road improvements that will benefit everyone. What's the catch? Asked Banker Grayson suspiciously. No catch. This community gave me a chance when I needed one. Now I want to return that favor. The proposal Elena outlined was comprehensive and generous. The new school would accommodate growing enrollment and provide advanced educational opportunities previously unavailable in rural Nevada. The medical clinic would allow Dr. Harrison to serve a wider area with better equipment. Road improvements would connect Copper Ridge to major transportation routes, bringing commerce and opportunity to businesses beyond the mining industry. Why would you do all this? Asked Mrs. Winters, clearly puzzled by Elena's generosity. Elena considered her answer carefully. Because success that isn't shared becomes empty after a while. Because this town believed in me enough to hire a teacher sight unseen. And because I want to prove that prosperity can lift everyone up, not just the person who finds it first. The council voted unanimously to accept Elena's proposals, but she could see skepticism in some faces. People who had been quick to criticize her dreams were now suspicious of her generosity. It seemed she couldn't win either way. Marcus found her that evening sitting on the porch of her expanded cabin, looking out over the moonlit mining operation that had transformed her life. Second thoughts? He asked, settling into the chair beside her. About the mining? Never. About everything else, sometimes. Elena sighed deeply. I wanted to prove that dreams were worth pursuing. I never expected to have to prove that success was worth sharing. Change is hard for people, Marcus said quietly. You're asking them to adjust their entire understanding of how the world works. That takes time. Elena nodded, but her frustration remained. She had imagined that her success would inspire others to pursue their own dreams. Instead, it seemed to create more division than unity. The answer came from an unexpected source 2 weeks later. Elena was reviewing mining reports in her cabin when Jenny Morrison burst through the door with excitement radiating from her young face. Miss Elena, you have to come to the schoolhouse right away. Something wonderful is happening. Elena followed Jenny through town, curious about what could generate such enthusiasm. At the schoolhouse, she found a crowd gathered around the building, but these weren't the usual skeptics or critics. These were families with children, adults carrying books, teenagers eager to learn. What's happening here? Elena asked Dr. Harrison, who stood smiling at the edge of the crowd. Word spread about your plans for educational expansion, he explained. People are volunteering to help with everything from construction to curriculum development. Seems your generosity inspired something you didn't expect. Elena watched in amazement as men who had criticized her land purchase now discussed architectural plans for the new school building. Women who had dismissed her as a foolish city girl were organizing fundraising efforts to supplement her donations. Children who had learned courage from her example were planning presentations about their own dream projects. Miss Martinez called out Tom Bradley, the worker she had helped research mining claims. My wife says she'll volunteer to teach reading classes for the miners who want to improve their education. And Carlos Mendez is organizing Spanish lessons for families who want to communicate better with the Mexican workers. The crowd parted as Elena approached the schoolhouse steps. She looked out at faces that had once shown skepticism but now reflected hope and possibility. These people weren't waiting for someone else to solve their problems or create their opportunities. They were taking inspiration from her example and applying it to their own situations. Thank you all, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the gathering. But I want you to understand something. This isn't about my generosity or my success. This is about what happens when a community decides to believe in itself. She gestured toward the mining operation visible in the distance. That silver was always in the ground. I didn't create it. I just had the courage to look for it when others said it wasn't there. Each of you has something valuable waiting to be discovered, but only if you're willing to dig for it. Young Sarah O'Malley raised her hand from the front of the crowd. Miss Martinez, does that mean we can all find treasure like you did? Elena smiled at the girl who had always understood more than her years suggested. Sarah, the treasure isn't the silver. The treasure is learning to trust yourself when everyone else doubts you. The treasure is working towards something meaningful, even when it seems impossible. The silver just proved that the treasure was real all along. The crowd began to disperse, but Elena noticed people lingering in small groups, continuing discussions about their own projects and possibilities. The energy was infectious, and she realized that her success had finally accomplished what she had hoped for from the beginning. It wasn't making her wealthy that mattered. It was showing others that wealth was possible for anyone willing to work for it. That spring, Elena stood on the same porch where she had once swept in solitude, watching a transformed landscape. The mining operation hummed with purposeful activity. The new school building rose from the desert floor, its walls already echoing with the sounds of expanded classes. The medical clinic bustled with patients from surrounding communities. Roads that had once been barely passable now carried regular traffic between Copper Ridge and the outside world. But the most significant change was in the people themselves. Men who had worked other people's claims for wages were now researching their own prospecting opportunities. Women who had accepted limited roles were starting businesses and pursuing education. Children who had never imagined futures beyond their parents' struggles were making plans that stretched far beyond the Nevada desert. Marcus joined her on the porch, carrying the latest production reports that showed continuing exceptional yields from the silver mine. "Any regrets?" he asked, a question that had become their evening ritual. About turning down controlling partnerships? About staying independent? About sharing the wealth? Elena shook her head. "The only thing I regret is waiting so long to trust my instincts about this land." "And about us?" Marcus asked quietly. Elena looked at the man who had validated her dreams and supported her vision. Their partnership had grown beyond business into something deeper and more personal. He had proposed marriage the previous month, and she had asked for time to consider how personal relationships might complicate their professional arrangement. "I've been thinking about what you said," she replied. "About building something together that's bigger than either of us could create alone." Marcus waited, understanding that Elena needed to express her thoughts completely before making such an important decision. "I realized that everything good that's happened started with trusting someone who believed in possibilities when others saw only problems," she continued. "You saw potential in my land when everyone else saw wasteland. I want to see what we can build together when we both believe in the same dream." Marcus smiled and reached for her hand. "Is that a yes to my proposal?" "That's a yes to a partnership that includes everything," Elena said, squeezing his fingers. "Business, marriage, and whatever dreams we haven't discovered yet." As the sun set over the Nevada hills, painting the desert in shades of gold that rivaled the wealth hidden beneath its surface, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started with nothing but courage and $40. She had endured months of criticism and doubt. She had faced choices between safety and possibility, between conformity and independence. Now she stood on land that had made her wealthy beyond imagination, surrounded by a community that had learned to dream bigger than its circumstances. But more importantly, she had proven to herself and everyone around her that the greatest treasures aren't found by accident. They're discovered by people brave enough to dig where others refuse to look, persistent enough to continue when others give up, and generous enough to share what they find. The silver beneath the desert had made Elena rich, but the courage to claim it had made her free. And in the end, freedom was the treasure that mattered most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.